Good evening. It is Tuesday, July 18th at 6:01 p.m. and I am calling this meeting of the National Board of Education Policy Committee meeting to order. I'm Heather Raymond. We also have Christina Darling, Regan Lampier, Paula Johnson, and Mr. Posca this evening. Did I get everybody? All right, so most of our agenda this evening is leftover from our June policy agenda where our meeting got abridged significantly. And then we have a couple new things. And then for August, Mr. Posca and I were talking about making August a work session to tackle those policies that we had talked about briefly back in, I think it was April or May. It was around the time of it must have been May, around the time of the big cyber attack, and we couldn't access some of the policy things. So if Mr. Posca doesn't mind, we went ahead, I'm saying we, I didn't do any of this. Mr. Posca and Tara Kinsella printed out for us, is this one for me too? Yeah. Printed out for us all of the policies. What we have now and the New Hampshire School Board Association recommended policies. So I'm going to give you guys all this now for homework so you can take it home, mark it up, and next month will be a working meeting where we really dive into wordsmithing. And it'll be less us having something pretty and prepared and more us working on it. We're also going to be inviting our student reps to come in because the student board member policy is on the agenda for next month. Mr. Castellano has said that there is a board somewhere in the state that lets their student members have a symbolic vote. And so that's something he wants to discuss with us. So I kind of put the end at the beginning, but I wanted to make sure I remembered to give you guys this. And to note for anybody else who's watching that next month will be a working meeting.
I just want to jump in. I've tried to kind of direct you with all these policies, kind of the order it should be kind of reviewed in, along with some possible recommendations to consider as you're going through them. In addition to policy BBBF, which is about the student representative participation, there are two other policies that I'll be bringing forward that I would ask that we try to, we'll have to move on. One is EHBR. We are going to talk about EHB today. It's about data records retention. EHBR outlines who's responsible for all the different varied responsibilities with that. We're still having, with vacations, everything else, I'm trying to get everyone to kind of check off their part of it to make sure that's accurate. And then the other one is policy CCA, which is about the organization of the administrative team at the district. So with a couple possible updates coming, we might have some updates to that org chart when they will have to act upon. So those are the two others I may have to ask you to act upon. So hopefully this helps direct you with some of the policy work, because it does get a little bit redundant, and I think kind of reviewing them gives us the opportunity to maybe, and possibly adding a new policy would give us the opportunity to kind of rescind some other policies due to the redundancy. So once you get into that, hopefully you'll be able to see that.
All right, thank you. Any questions on that before we dive into tonight's? I know I could avoid it to the end, but sometimes I get so excited that we've achieved our goal for the evening that I'm like ready to go. So, all right, and so I've just made a note on the notes to Ms. Kinsella to ask for a couple extra of these to be put in the bag for Monday's meeting, our big meeting, so that Dante and Warren can also get copies, and then any other board members who might be interested in having this before 3 days before the next meeting. Because I know for myself, I like to have the policies, like if we're going to be wordsmithing, I like time. The weekend is great, but sometimes more is better. Okay, so tonight, having said that, we do have 1, 2, 3 policies in our Bs that I wanted to start off with. The first one, well, they're in different orders in my packet than they are on my list. So the first one on the list is BEB, but if you're looking in your packet, BEAR is first. I don't know why. So the first one on the list is BEB Special Board Meetings. The only change that we're recommending here since 2010 is to change the reference. It says board members unable to attend a meeting in person may attend in accordance with RSA 91A 2(3), which is the correct legal thing, and the procedures given in BEA-R. We're asking that we change that legal reference to BEDC, quorum. And the reason is, if you keep scrolling, what we'd like you to do tonight is to approve taking BEAR, which is just an addendum to a policy, and putting that whole thing under the quorum policy. Because for me, if I'm wondering what constitutes a quorum, I'm looking under quorum. I'm not looking under some other random policy. But it's kind of up to this board. So that's where all the red comes from in policy BEDC. It's literally taking our updates from the right to know law regarding remote participation in meetings and how that qualifies for a quorum and putting it in our quorum policy. And it wasn't before. Before it just basically said a majority was a quorum, but now we have the actual updated legal definitions for that. So that was kind of a lot. I did all three at once. Any comments or questions or concerns? Ms. Lampier?
I think it makes sense to do it this way. I like the language and everything, and to have it all in one place is good. I don't see any reason not to.
Okay. Go ahead, Ms. Darling.
I agree with Regan. I definitely like having it all in one place and the way it's laid out. My only question is, should we include something about how committees have 3 people, therefore 2 is technically a quorum? And what does that then mean for board members outside of conversations? If I'm seen with, one of you out in public, is that an issue?
Two questions, 2 answers. So it's still a simple majority for our committees. So our committees are 3 people and an alternate, so a simple majority is 2. So we would still need 2 people physically present and 1 person on the phone. So that doesn't really change anything. And by just saying a simple majority, if at some point in the future the board, expanded to 5-member committees, I don't see us doing that. But if we wanted to, we could still do that without having to update every policy that mentions how many people are is a quorum. Regarding making sure that we're not violating right to know, people on the same board or the same committee can socially see each other. It used to be very common for boards to go out for coffee or drinks after meetings and chat. Sometimes people go to dinner. As long as you're not discussing topics that are under consideration by the board. So earlier this year, we had wanted to have some shadowing happening for creating the agenda, and we discovered that because 2 is a quorum, that violated the right to know law. The other place where the right to know law gets thorny is social media. So if someone has posted something on Facebook or Twitter or something, and a quorum of the body also posts on that, it is now a violation of the right to know law because we have just disenfranchised all of the public who didn't receive prior notice that information that is on a topic that is before the board was going to be discussed in that way. And that's really the whole point, is to make sure that the public has that proper notice that something is going to be discussed and they have a right to come and watch or participate.
I know we just recently did the board members' ethics and policies like that, but I kind of wish we could go back and add to it, like a social media blackout, essentially. You cannot talk about this topic on social media. That way there is no risk of that, but...
Right, but board members still have their First Amendment rights. So if you want to go on your personal social media and post something, you can. The problem then comes when a quorum of the body then comments on your post. Then it can violate the right to know law. So, my advice is that we not discuss board matters on social media, but we can't disenfranchise members of their First Amendment rights either. Ms. Johnson knows a lot more about the right to know law than I do. Do you want to chime in?
I don't know if I know that much more, but all I know is that if you don't want to take the risk of violating the policy here on board members, a quorum, don't go on Facebook. Don't say very much. If you want to go on it, just say what a beautiful day it is, put some inspirations on there and things like that. The right to know is really sticky about things. Watching what's going on in the city here, I mean, people ask for information, they're not getting it. Average citizens, it's bad. But, you have that right to ask for it. And, if I have made a policy that if people, and a couple people said to me, let's go out. Ms. Ziem said to myself one time, would Ms. Oden, why don't the three of us go out? I said, well, I think the three of us are on a committee together. I said, I think it's better that we pass because it doesn't look good. You could slip and say something, and you might not mean to talk about a committee or what's coming before that committee or the board. So I tend to, my practice is business and pleasure, and I just don't go out and do that. It's just, I call it clean hands. And that's basically it. I enjoy being with the people on the board. I'd love to go out for coffee. I don't drink, one of these goody-goody two-shoes, I guess. But I don't want to violate their right to know, and somebody's going to see you, and they're going to say, they're on the same committee, and two makes the quorum, and they're going to say, but I think they were talking about something that they shouldn't have. So I think that's easier. I mean, if we want to have a social gathering, bring the cupcakes in here and let the public join us, with the coffee. And I just think that's just my opinion. And I hate to, kind of put it that way, but I guess that's the easiest way to show the difference between us as a board going out and inviting the public here to be with us under something like that. But that was a very good question, and and really trying to dig in to see how can we as board members, if we wanted to just go out and just go out as friendship, but there's always that fine line. And that's what we have to consider, that fine line as elected officials.
Yeah, and and I think when it comes to quorums, when it comes to committee meetings, we can always schedule additional time at committee meetings. So if there's a topic in front of one of the committees that we don't feel like we have adequately discussed in a committee meeting, the best option is to schedule another meeting, and again, so that the public can be here, as opposed to continuing a conversation either online or offline with someone. And just a note on the right to know law also, it doesn't only apply to social media, it also applies to emails and other electronic communication and phone calls. So I can't, our board is 9. If we have something coming before the board, I can't call 4 other people because that would violate the right to know law. And I can't email 4 other people or text 4 other people either about the issue that's going to come before the board. I need to.
This is not a smart question, I swear. Can you text 2 people, call 3 people, and email 3 people?
No.
Is there a way?
No, that's called daisy chaining.
Okay.
The total number of people that you talk to about a topic that is before the board, the total number of board members that you talk to about a topic before the board must be less than a quorum. So, we have redistricting coming up. There's 4 of us. I can mention that redistricting is coming up. People are asking for information. But if there were a 5th person here, we could not discuss it because it is not a meeting with that on the agenda. Does that make sense? It's one of the reasons why when we were having those community forums, we could only have so many board members arrive at the community forums, because if a 5th person showed up, then we were violating the right to know law because they weren't properly noticed public meetings for the board.
Thank you so much. I feel so educated, and I really appreciate it. I had no idea about any of this.
Well, I will also say, when I was on the Board of Aldermen and the mayor would call people into the office to talk to them about legislation, I didn't like to go in there, and I don't think I ever did, because I felt it was backdoor politicking and that the public didn't have that view on how to discuss it. I mean, this goes on. I mean, Nashua is small, the state is bigger, and if you see what goes on in the city and the state, you know how it is in Washington, behind those closed doors. So I always made a practice that way, too. I didn't want to hear, I mean, they call on the phone, okay, great, thank you for the conversation, goodbye. Well, how are you going to vote? I'll figure it out when I get there at the meeting.
Yep.
So that just kind of, again, it kind of gives you that clean hands, that you're not showing your cards and you're not trying to be persuaded. You have to make your own decisions with all the facts that's presented to you versus one person calling you up and trying to convince you to vote another way.
Yep. And that's not to say, and again, this is only applicable to individuals on a board together. So anyways, and my personal feeling on all of this is that we can always schedule another meeting.
Yeah.
Like there are very few circumstances that I've encountered over the last 6 years where we had to make a decision that night, no questions, or that middle of the afternoon, and we couldn't, just say, hey, we need to take a pause and come back tomorrow or in a couple days. So, all right, so I'm going to go down them in order. So I would like us to, I move that we approve approve BEB as amended and send it to the full board.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Oh, that was the other thing. On BEDC, it's very clear about electronic participation. You have to say why you can't be there in person. You have to say how you're participating. I'm on my, cell phone or whatever, or I'm on Zoom. You have to be able to hear and speak to everybody, and you have to identify everybody who's in your location. So if you are participating electronically because you're on a business trip or whatever, and you are doing it in a conference room, you need to say, I'm in a conference room, but I have my earbuds in or whatever, because the public has a right to know who's influencing you in the room where you're participating from. So having said that.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes.
Do we have the capability of Zooming, or we don't here? No.
We still don't. Will the upgrades to this room allow us to Zoom? Do you know, Mr. Posca?
I believe that was the intentions, and I think we're seeing the beginnings of that with some of the new equipment we have right now. So I think that is the intentions there, and that's one of the reasons why we kind of noted this in the policy here, so to plan for that going forward.
Nope. Jimmy says no.
Jimmy said that not yet, and we need more to find some more money. And
How about
given
the Capital Improvement Committee? They don't seem to give us very much money.
I think that's a fine discussion for finance.
Yeah, I know.
All right, so I move that we approve BEDC as amended and send it to the full board.
Second.
You? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, and then, wait, I have them in the wrong order in my packet. Now, I move that we rescind BEAR because it is now incorporated in BEDC with our last motion.
Second.
This will be fun to explain again at the full meeting. To come up with like a one-liner that will explain all of that in one sentence so that we don't have to go through it again. All right, so all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, moving on. The next policy is EBCF-A. So this was a policy that we had created during the COVID-19 pandemic, specifically to comply with some federal regulations about leave for people who had been exposed to or had tested positive for COVID-19 because they weren't supposed to be coming to school. So we no longer need this because the pandemic is over. So my recommendation is that we go ahead and rescind it at this time.
I have a question. I understand why we had this policy. I'm not at all saying that we shouldn't. Something that I have tried to fight for many, many times over in my own working career has been the fact that the CDC recommends 4 to 5 days out of work if you do not have a fever while you have the flu. It's 10 days if you do have a fever. One of the biggest issues that we have in school that causes a lot of our medical absences is the flu and colds. And I would love to see us treating our staff at the very least with the respect of saying, you know, we outright said, okay, we're going to listen to the CDC on how long you should be home for COVID. We should at least give you that grace for other diseases.
It's actually a really interesting idea, and we approved at our last full board meeting recreating the wellness committee, and I feel like the wellness committee has to have representation from our staff and also our school nurses, and I feel like that's a great place to put that question to the people who know about employment law and know about, you know, health and safety stuff.
Yeah.
Ms. Johnson?
Thank you. I know in a lot of schools, we just put in the Santa Life. So I think what we need to do also is see what the attendance has been since that's been installed and see if that's helped at all during cold and flu. I don't think some of them have been in there a whole year. They just went in, I think, mid-year, the installation of them. So that would be a good tracking device. And we've had portable ones in some of the schools, so that's a good tracking device that we should check up on. But I think it really is on the individual's responsibility that if you're sick, you don't come in, you don't go to work, you stay home. If your kids are sick, you keep your kids home. I get what happened here with COVID because we didn't know the extent of it. Because as I was reading over the benefits, we don't give benefits like this to people who had the regular flu or cold. I thought that some of this was discriminatory, and your private health information was incomplete, as far as I'm concerned, a blow-up of HIPAA. In order to get it, you had to prove that you took the vaccine. And people who couldn't take the vaccine for whatever health reasons or whatever, wasn't afforded the same respect. So I think to write a policy on a lot of things, people need to take ownership of their health. And if they're sick with a fever, don't come to work. If your kids are home sick and they have a stomach virus or they have the flu or something, don't send them to school. Stay home with them.
I mean, I completely 110% agree with you on paper. The problem is I've been that nurse working in senior living, sick, and still going to work because at the end of the day, not only do you need the paycheck, but you're going to lose your job. And a lot of jobs have that threat. I like to think that we don't hold that threat here. According to like our contracts, we don't seem to. We seem to treat people very well. But yeah, no, I would love to see this go to the wellness committee and see what can maybe happen.
Yeah, I'd really like to hear from that committee. And I know that the committee hasn't been formed yet, so I'm kicking the can down the road a little bit. But it's also July, and it's not, massively flu season, so hopefully we can, start looking at that in the future. I wanted to say something else, and now I've forgotten it. I wanted to say, I noticed kind of even to the end of this school year, at some of the high school functions, and even just like dropping stuff off, because I have high schoolers, that there are still students who are wearing masks if they felt under the weather or if it was a particularly bad air quality day, they were wearing masks to protect themselves and to protect others. And I think that there's a generational shift here where COVID has made wearing masks and doing other things to protect your own health and protect other people's health a little bit more socially acceptable in our student generations, which is interesting. All right. Reagan, you have your light on. Did you want to say anything?
Well, I think we still need a second.
Okay, so I move to rescind EBCF-A.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right. Next, EHB. You'll notice right at the top of this one has a lot of red. There is also EHB-R, which is a supplement to this policy, which we are still working on. There was quite a bit of updates to state law. Is it just the state law or also federal? I think it's just state law. Yeah, just state law, RSA 189-29A, regarding what the district and all districts are legally required to do regarding student records, how we're supposed to retain, how long we're supposed to retain them, how we're supposed to handle retaining them, how we can go about destroying them. There's extra requirements for special education records. There's a whole paragraph in here about how to handle right-to-know requests and records that might fall under that. And then there's a whole section regarding what is sensitive information, which requires special handling, and then they define a number, I can't count how many, but I don't know, a dozen different things that would qualify as special information and how to handle that kind of records. And I just felt like this was really timely, given the data breach, and so far we haven't had too much fallout that I'm aware of regarding it. But I think it's really important that we have a policy that is up to date with state law and is very clear about how we are going to handle these records, handle storing them, and handle eventually destroying them if necessary. Did I miss anything?
No, I think you captured it pretty well, and I think, a lot of the red lines you see came from some major updates that occurred in August of 2022. So this has a kind of another backside to it, AHB-R, that we're still working on. So when you get that next month, you're going to see, how we've tried to detail under the different offices and categories of who's responsible for what aspects of it, for special education records, child work permits, et cetera, et cetera. So some major updates happened in August 2022. I think our current policy had not been updated since 2012. So we were well overdue for kind of a revision. So this gets us to kind of back to the playing ground with everybody else, and when we'll follow up with the HBR in August.
Yep, and I think you guys will like EHBR because EHB sets up, well, here's what the law says about it, and then EHBR, Mr. Pasca's working on. It's basically like a large chart about here's the type of record and who's responsible for tracking it and maintaining it, and by job title, not individual, so that it's very clear to everybody where their area of responsibility lays, because we don't want any of these things kind of getting lost out there or left to chance. So questions or comments on it? It is a lot.
That was my first question, was about who was going to be in charge of, especially the electronic records, because it seems like it's a big job.
And I think it's going to be, there are some district-oriented records that we're responsible for here at the school. On the school side, there's going to be some school aspects there. Then I think it also, HR is involved, business office is involved for variation. So, I think to the point Ms. Raymond made, that there's so much there, and trying to kind of piecemeal that out. Does it make sense that this office is responsible for that? And trying to have some of those conversations. So, trying to get everyone corner everyone to have these conversations has been the biggest challenge. So hopefully we'll have this for you in next month. But EHB is certainly long over, based upon the updates that happened about a year ago. Certainly it's time to move forward on that one.
Okay, thanks.
The other highlight I wanted to bring your attention to is regarding special education records. Typically, the district is allowed to hold on to kind of general information like, did a student go here? What year did they graduate? There isn't a time limit on that. But when it comes to special education records, parents have the right to request that the district destroy special education records. They also have the right to ask prior to the student turning 26 that the student's records be retained by the district an extra 4 years. Typically, they would be retained till age 26. So parents now have very clearly in the law and in our policy the right to say, hey, we don't want you to keep them till 26. We want you to get rid of them. Or, hey, we want you to keep them till my child is 30 because I've gotten guardianship and they're going to need long-term care, and that would be helpful for their care planning. The law has changed to allow us a little bit more flexibility for parents of students who had special education services.
Do you know if the other kids, if their permanent general records are kept?
So the records that we keep are name, address, phone number, grades, attendance record, grade level completed, and the year they graduated. And we kind of keep that indefinitely because people need it as they're going through their life. Sometimes, an employer will ask for your transcript, or if you want to go to grad school or, college at 35 or 40, they'll ask for your high school transcript. So that's kept indefinitely.
Okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Allen.
To be clear, if you were to say get suspended in high school or middle school, is disciplinary action on your permanent record? Because I've heard it go both ways. I was always taught that it was a myth.
So the permanent record, and I'll read it, includes the student's name, address, and phone number, their grades, attendance record, classes they took, the grade level they completed, and/or the year of graduation.
I really wish more kids were smart enough to be listening to these meetings.
And if, as far as our discipline goes, our discipline policy and also in our student handbooks has a procedure for parents and students if they have had a disciplinary action, if they want to appeal the disciplinary action, or if they want to request a modification to the record that we keep while they're in school about discipline.
Okay.
So, so if a parent wants to, like if a student gets suspended for something and a parent disagrees with that decision, there is a process under our disciplinary policy on how they can go about asking for it to be reviewed and then potentially overturned, and then even all the way up to modifying or striking it from the record.
There's an appeal process to go through, yes.
So, but that's not part of this is talking about like your transcript.
I was going to say, it's just useful to hear, if only because there's so many times that we hear, I don't want this to come on my child's permanent record. And it's interesting to hear what is actually on their permanent record and what's included and what's not. So thank you.
If I could just follow with Ms. Lampier, I think you brought up a good point about, how long for this record or that record. And I think when you see EHBR, how it is laid out, it kind of identifies the article, the piece of paper, how long we're supposed to hold on for it, who's responsible for overseeing that. So I think it will become a little bit more clear next month, the question you just referred to, and how we're delineating all those various records.
Any other questions? I know I kind of only touched on like 2 parts of this 3-page policy, and there's quite a bit in there about how we handle anything that has electronic records as well, and printouts or drives or CDs or whatever type of physical storage container for electronic records is also mentioned here on page 3, section 2. All right, no one say anything. So I move to approve EHB as amended and send it to the full board.
Second.
All right, all in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Okay, so IHAM. This is our health and physical education exemption from instruction policy. So you'll notice that there is quite a bit of read on this policy as well. It hadn't been updated since 2010. And this talks about how parents can go about exercising their rights to opt students out of either phys ed or health education or sexual education courses or coursework. And it's very specific about what those various topics contain for education, and then also how to go about getting an excuse for participation and how to go about providing alternative educational resources for those students. And so this one is, we have an opt-out for sensitive topics that kind of covers anything that a parent might object to in any class, but this is very specific about those 3 topics. Go ahead, Ms. Lampier.
So I would like to see the curriculum for this class, because I don't really understand how you teach abstinence other than just telling people not to have sex. And also, I didn't see anything here about avoiding pregnancy, which as a teenager who got pregnant, I think that's pretty important, so I hope that it is included somewhere.
So I'm going to let Mr. Posca cover this, because I can tell you that having 2 teenagers, neither one of them has gotten sexual education in Nashua. I was having coffee with a member from Derry, and Derry's not teaching sex ed right now either. It used to be taught at the middle school level back in the 90s when I was a kid.
Why not?
And there's my understanding from my conversation with other people at the state level and other boards is that there's a difficulty finding people who are certified to teach the class.
What certification do they need?
But I'm going to let Mr. Posca, who knows more about that, talk about it.
So, to Ms. Raymond's point, this had not been updated in quite some time. There were some other updates from the state from around July of 2020. I had asked Director of Health and Wellness, Ms. Lisa Gingras, along with one of our high school lead health educators, Jason Roby, to review this. So the updates that you're seeing in IHAM reflect not only what is in line with the state, but also is in line with what we do as a district. I think to the point that Ms. Raymond made, there is a significant challenge in finding not only health specific educators, but also physical education educators. That's years ago you would if you posted a physical education job at any level, you'd be inundated with applicants, and much like everything else these days, we're not seeing that same pool of candidates for those positions. So what this law does, or what this policy does, is kind of detail what it is that we do as a district. I think a lot of the education that you're referring to is being pushed to the high school based upon time constraints and what we can do, and how often students get health at the middle school level. In addition, I'm just preempting this a little bit, IHAM-R is the opt-out form. So we've talked about that opt-out form previously. It's been a challenge sometimes it's a challenge to find. So we also reviewed that and updated that and provided that as part of this policy as well.
And I just want to point out that there is a policy, also an I policy, that requires us to provide advance notice to parents when any sexual health topics are going to be addressed in any class, including the health classes. I'm trying to find it right now. I think it's the other opt-out policy. I think it's under IGE. So under IGE, which it says the district will provide parents and legal guardians not less than 2 weeks advance notice of curriculum course material used for instruction of human sexuality or human sexual education. Notice shall be provided either electronically or in writing. So even in those health classes where we have someone certified to teach sexual health, they have to provide written notice to parents 2 weeks in advance so that parents have the opportunity to opt out if they want. Which, I tend to think that teaching kids how not to get pregnant is how to teach them how not to get pregnant. But I also respect the fact that some parents want to do that teaching at home. So, go ahead, Ms. Darling.
I'm not as concerned about the opt-out. I feel like in Nashua probably has some of the most passionate parents for opting out of stuff that I've seen in quite some time. But I am concerned with the wording of what the education shall include, because it feels the need to mention abstinence and sexually transmitted infections. And at one point, it even specifies AIDS, HIV. What about chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, and gender stereotyping? I know that the average person walking down the street, you're more likely to have a divisive issue on the gender stereotyping than they are things like abstinence versus whether kids are having sex nowadays. But do you know the average person gets their sexual education from pornography? 73% of people in this beautiful study that I'm going to send you guys said that they thought being ejaculated on was 100% expected of them.
Right, so let the record show that I said, ugh. So the reason that those particular topics are listed on this policy is because those are the topics that are listed under state law, under RSA 18611 9B, health and sexual education. I 100% think that we ought to be teaching other things as well, but those are the ones that are that's the minimum requirement under state law. Go ahead, Ms. Lampier.
So I just wanted to, I looked into this because I was curious about it. So I looked at the administrative rules for the Department of Education, and that is where abstinence is mentioned. In the actual law, it says family life and comprehensive sexuality education, including instruction relative to abstinence and STD in accordance with RSA 189. So it doesn't say anything about gender stereotypes or anything, and it does say abstinence. I think it was my mistake. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Just ignore me.
That's all right. I'm glad we double-checked on it, because I want to make sure what the law says is in the policy.
That's a good point, though. If gender stereotyping wasn't on that law, but we're willing to add it here because it's important to us as a district, which I personally believe it's important as a district, why not include birth control to this list? Abstinence and birth control and sexually transmitted infections. I mean, I personally would push that we should be teaching kids all about pregnancy from day one, but I get that families should have the right to determine when that's taught.
I'm going to let Ms. Johnson go, and then I'm going to ask Mr. Posca about the actual curriculum and whether or not, what the impact of us changing the wording would have on curriculum.
Before I talk about birth controls, in paragraph number 2, students may be excused from participation in physical education classes upon receipt of notice from a licensed physician. Should we add nurse practitioner and PAs also in there? So just because of the word physician can mean more doctor, but we allow PAs, physician assistants now, and nurse practitioners to write letters. So I just want to make sure that we cover that.
I think that's important. I also would like to point out that we accept them in practice from physical therapists and
Right.
other. So should we say licensed medical professional? No, that might be too broad.
Right, or just maybe list.
I mean, I think what could be a licensed medical professional that we wouldn't want writing a note?
I don't know.
I mean, we have chiropractors that write notes also, but
I think that the next sentence talks about temporary excuse from physical education. Participation may be granted by the principal designee on a daily basis. So I think, does that cover kind of the other things that may come up over the course of why a student should be excused from gym? You know, if a student shows up in crutches with a cast, that's almost self-explanatory at times. If there's another reason, whether it's coming from, some type of medical professional and or mom and dad about what's going on, I think it gives us the opportunity can talk to the family, work with the family about that workaround should be, or what the the reason is, and how can we work around that to support the needs of that student. I understand what Ms. Johnson's referencing here is kind of painting a more global picture of who is going to be writing these letters here, and I think there's something to be said for that. But I also think that next sentence also gives us a little leeway for what we're looking for.
Thank you.
So I just want to make sure I wrote down what you asked correctly. So you're requesting that we make an edit on paragraph 2, line 1, receipt of notice from a licensed physician, physician's assistant, or nurse practitioner,
Right.
right?
And if you take it from a physical therapist, you can put that in there, whatever you feel is needed, or that can just come under licensed physician, whatever, because I just want to make sure that somebody doesn't come in with the notes from the nurse practitioner, especially a nurse practitioner, and they say, well, we can't accept this, it's not a physician.
Right. I don't know, do you know if if it's an issue?
I don't think it has been an issue. I think, if there is a student who, there's always, within a lot of the phys ed classes, they're providing a variety of different options for the students to choose from to participate in. Even it might just be walking the outside of the track or the basketball court, or it's a team sport game, it's an individual sport game. But I think if there's an overall concern, I think the teacher is working not only with the family but the nurse to address what the concern is, why the child is not participating in physical education. So have I heard about this being a large concern? The answer is no. But I think to Ms. Johnson's point is, if we get a note from some type of medical professional, I don't know if there's a better way to say it, but we certainly want to acknowledge the fact what's going on, and generates another conversation of why the student may or may not be able to participate.
Or you could change it to any and all licensed medical, what you just said?
Instead of change physician to licensed medical professional.
Professional, yeah.
Any objections to that edit? Okay.
And it covers everything broadly.
So notice from a licensed medical professional.
And the other thing I want to get into is that where do we draw the line in school on what we teach our students? Abstinence is one thing, starting with birth control pills, because I sat in the State House and I was on the Democratic side of the aisle on the morning after pill. And I voted against it because you don't know if that child has a contraindication, that if they take it, who was responsible for it.
That's the pharmacist's job.
No, it's not really the pharmacist's job.
That's part of their job description, is to look at medications that a person is receiving.
Well, I'm going to tell you something here, and I thought about that because my daughter was 15 years old when that happened. A lot of kids don't know what medications they're taking, and you just give them that pill, and they don't know what medications, that child can be injured for life. What happens if they bleed out? And I was the one who said, and I couldn't vote for it because I asked the same question. Why is it the pharmacist's responsibility? I wouldn't want to take liability for that on a minor. You can't give them an aspirin in here, but yet you could talk about that. So I think it should be more broad. I think it's parents that should be making that decision at this point in time. It comes under that parental rights on this whole thing. And how far do we go as a school to start teaching all this? Parents have to take, again, it's called responsibility. I've had boys and I've had a daughter. I've had 2 and then 1. And as a parent with a daughter and with sons, I sat there and talked to them about behavior with women, how you treat a female, and what you don't do to get older. And, responsibility, that's all I'm going to say about it, because I was at the State House when that whole thing went down. And it's great. But if you're the one who has that daughter that took that pill and they had a reaction to it, it might be the pharmacist's fault, but then you have that child that could be dying. That's a twofold thing.
So here's my question then. If we're looking at it that way, do we charge a parent with abuse for allowing a child to get a IUD that gets placed incorrectly and causes a puncture, which then it makes it so that they can't have children ever? No.
This isn't our problem here in school.
It is our problem.
No, it's not.
As long as babies are having babies, it's a problem.
That's between the
I mean, I can see just from this conversation why birth control is not mentioned in the policy, and I guess there are limits to what we can do. So I mean, if we can't put it in because it would be too controversial, then I guess we can't put it in.
So I guess I have 2 thoughts on this. One, I think that the I think that the obligation of educational facilities is to educate kids about how bodies work. I mean, we're teaching them how, their pulmonary system works. We're teaching them how all their other systems work, the central nervous system. We should probably teach them about the reproductive system as well. Having said that, if we were to add in our policy, things that aren't required by the law, such as education on birth control and education on, well, it says gender stereotyping, so I guess that covers that. So information on birth control. How would that affect our current curriculum, and could there be a snowball effect, I guess is my question. Because I don't know what the current curriculum books or online or whatever it is that we're using say, because that's curriculum committee's job.
I'd like to tell you I'm well-versed in the health curriculum as I sit here, but I'm not sure I can speak to that. I think what we could do is I could certainly look into that with Ms. Gingras and Mr. Roby, if that's a concern, but I can't give you a good answer here about what that next step is you're asking.
I did just look it up, and 94.7% of New Hampshire secondary schools teach students about methods of contraception. So in my opinion, if we are already teaching it as part of the curriculum, then there should be no problem adding the words "and birth control" to the policy. I just know that I don't feel comfortable voting it through without fully looking at it and how it affects the curriculum.
Right, so the edit that you're requesting is under paragraph 3, the first red line that starts sexuality in education, and we want to add, it says, shall include instruction relative to abstinence, birth control, comma, sexually transmitted infections. Oh, wait, I gotta make it make sense for grammar. Instruction relative to abstinence and sexually transmitted infections, birth control, comma, and gender stereotyping.
Yeah.
So that's paragraph 3, first read. I'm just trying to write it down the way I just said it. So topics to be covered, no, include instruction.
I think what you recommend is after infections, sexually transmitted infections, comma, birth control, comma.
Yeah. Oh, she's not going to be able to read this. So sexually transmitted infections, comma, birth control, comma, and instead of as well as. I'm writing smaller to make it fit, and now it's not legible. Okay. Do you want to take a vote on that? On the edits separately, or do we have consensus on the edits?
We need to run it by somebody first to make sure that we're not, I mean.
So we have two options. One, we can approve it, and if Mr. Posca finds out that it's not possible, he can tell us and before Monday. The other option is that we don't approve it now. We keep the notes and we discuss it next month when he has a chance to talk to people, if he's able to get the answer by next month.
I mean, I would feel comfortable voting on it because, I said that birth control, obviously it's controversial, but to me, the abstinent thing is controversial because what are you teaching children when you teach them to be abstinent? It's not even anything other than a sentence, don't have sex. How do you teach someone that? And if we can include that, then why can't we include birth control?
And I think the critical thing here is that parents have the right to opt out of any part of this instruction. So if parents have a personal belief that they don't want their children to be taught anything regarding sexuality or any of the topics listed in our curriculum, they have the right to be notified 2 weeks in advance before the topic is covered, and they have the right to opt out of the specific topic. Go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
Thank you. You're teaching them abstinence, but then in the next sentence, you're saying, well, if you can't abstain, take a birth control pill and you can have sex. So, I mean, it doesn't make sense here. If you know, it's okay, don't have sex, but if you're going to have it as a teenager, make sure you have those birth control pills. So it's a double standard here.
I mean,
And-
I guess, I think there might be some generational stuff. I'm a child of the 90s. I think we're all a different generation at this table right now, which is kind of interesting and fun. That's how it was taught when I was a kid, and it was taught in the 6th grade.
Over half of the teenagers in the United States, according to the CDC, have sexual intercourse before the age of 18. Abstinence as an education method does not work. If they're gonna do it and if they're gonna do it anyway, the least we can do is provide them the knowledge of how to be safe.
So it sounds like we have consensus on the committee to make the 2 edits we talked about regarding changing licensed physician to licensed medical professional and adding birth control to the list of topics. So having said that, I'm going to move to approve IHAM as amended tonight and send it to the full board.
Second.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay. And then I will let Ms. Bishop know that there might be further discussion on this at the full board. And I think that's fair because we, again, will have multiple, it's the generational differences in how we all went to school. And I think it's helpful and I think it's healthy for the board to have that kind of representation and that kind of discussion. So I'm glad for it. Go ahead, Ms. Johnson.
I just want to say, yeah, there is a generational thing here because I'm going to be 70, hard to believe. But I remember in the 70s, I was fighting for women's rights. So we could be where we are today. So I guess I'm not that far off, but in the 70s, there was the same thing. We just didn't do sex education in school, but nothing has changed between kids having sex back then and kids having sex now.
Yep.
Except if you got pregnant, it was a horrible thing, according to parents. It wasn't so much paraded now that girls could have the babies and, have a life, and keep them. Back then, they more.
I feel very lucky that I got to keep my son 20 years before. I might not have been able to. I would have had to give him up.
Well, you know what? That's a wonderful, beautiful thing.
Yep. And I think just a little shout out to our students and our staff here in Nashua. One of my favorite things as a board member is going to the graduations in general, but also the summer school graduation. And over the last 6 years, there's been a handful, it's not very many, but there's been a handful of young women who are graduating who bring their babies or small toddlers with them. And the fact that our community has embraced them and provided the support that they need to be able to pursue their academic goals while also pursuing, parenthood is amazing. And just, I can't imagine having that level of responsibility at that age. I certainly wasn't mature enough to handle it when I was that age. And so I'm always so impressed when I see these young people crossing the stage and overcoming. And I'm so proud of our staff for providing the support in-house for kids to be able to pursue their dreams.
And you really feel proud of them, and you feel so wonderful that they made that decision in spite of what happened with them, and you see these cute little faces, especially when you're a grandparent, you just look at them differently, and you just love them all. They're just beautiful human beings, and we've got a graduation coming up.
Yes, on the 31st.
Exactly. So it's going to be another wonderful year to see all these wonderful students of ours walking across the stage. Whatever obstacle they had, they overcame it,
Yep.
and they're getting their diploma.
Yeah. So, okay. So the next item is IHAM-R. There's one small update to this form. Actually, I think this is a brand-new form, but there's still a red line. And basically, this is the form that if parents want to opt out of any of the topics that we just discussed, including, by the way, you can opt out of other kinds of health information. There's a whole, I'm not an expert on what types of religious objections people might have, and so our form is very generic, so that we don't have to be experts. The parents can fill out the form and tell us what that they have the objection, what the topic is that they're objecting to. And then it says, I understand that in lieu of receiving instruction on this unit of health education, my child will be required to receive alternative learning and health education that's sufficient to enable my child to meet the state requirements for health education. And the reason we changed may to will is because we're talking about there are state standards that we are still obligated by law to make sure kids meet. And our staff work with parents to make sure that we can help figure out a way of instructing them that meets the state standards, but also meets their own religious needs. Any other questions or comments on that form? No. Okay. I've never heard of it being denied, but there is a space on the form for if something does get denied, and then if that happens, it falls under any other request for appeal. If a parent has an objection to a decision a staff member has made, they can always appeal it to, it goes up the chain. So it starts with the principals, the assistant superintendent, the superintendent. So I just want to make that clear that there is that space, but I'm not aware of that happening in practice because people aren't frivolous with this. So I move to approve, I wrote it down wrong, IHAM-R as amended and send it to the full board.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Darling. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay. And then the last two are our advertising policies. So it's KHB, advertising, sponsorship, and recognition in schools. This was last updated in 2017. I think Mr. Posca had Mr. Donovan go over it to make sure that this is still what makes sense for our district. There aren't a lot of laws that govern what schools are allowed to do. And so here in Nashua, we have kind of a historical perspective on how we handle advertising and sponsorships in the schools. So you'll notice that in our underwater robotics laboratory, there's a little plaque that says that the giant tanks were donated by BAE. And so that's pretty much how we recognize some of the sponsorships. And then as far as advertising goes, a lot of it is in regards to sporting events. So this covers the ads at Stellos Stadium. Where else do we have advertising? I can't think of anything else off the top of my head.
I'm just thinking of the new scoreboard at the Pennachuck gym. I don't think there's any advertising on that. So there's I think in the 90s, there was a lot of advertising out there, early 2000s. That was a prevalent way for many athletic programs to make money, but that has since gone by the wayside. So in my conversations with Mr. Donovan regarding this, I think this still works for us as far as what we're recommending to do. It's everything appears to line up with what we are currently doing as well.
Yep. Oh, I did think of another place, yearbooks and programs that like plays and such. I know we do allow advertising in like if you go to see a school play, you'll see that the parents might buy like a, way to go, Joe kind of a ad, or occasionally you'll see one from a corporate group that has bought advertising space in the program to help support the drama program, which I think is great and we should continue to do. Any questions or concerns on how we're currently doing advertising or thoughts on how we could do it differently? No? Okay, great. So I move that we approve KHB as is, no changes. That's not a good motion. I move that we approve KHB without changes.
Second.
Okay, thank you. All in favor, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay. And then KHBR is just a list of our procedures for how one would go about how our district goes about deciding the fees for placing those advertisements. And so basically it goes to the COO, which is Mr. Donovan, or his designee. He sets the rate as part of his budgeting that he does for the district. And I don't think there's anything else. I did want to mention, Ms. Johnson, it is subject to approval under DHA, the contract signing authority. So if someone is leasing space for a long period of time at Stellos or something, it does have to fall under our contract signing authority policy. So I don't see anybody wanting to talk. So I move that we send KHBR to the full board
Second.
without changes. Okay, seconded by Ms. Darling. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Okay, great. That's where we are. And then I gave you guys the packet for next month at the beginning. And then we also I have a couple other things in my queue moving forward. Did you mention the residency piece? So I have on our queue is reviewing our residency policies to make sure they comply with state law and admission of students, that policy. And then Mr. Posca and I and Dante Castellano, who he's not here because he's on that field trip to Europe with the World War II battlegrounds, have been talking about, we started talking several months ago about competency grading and in regards to graduation requirements, and it opened up kind of the conversation on grade recovery. So if you get an incomplete in your class, we have a policy that deals with that, like how to go about recovering that credit. Like maybe you missed one exam or something that you need to go back and take. But Mr. Castellano and Mr. Posca and I have been talking about talking to the principals about how the district handles grading and grade recovery within classes so that there's consistency within departments and across the schools, so that if you take Spanish, whether you take it at North or South, and it doesn't matter which Spanish teacher you take it from, if you fail a test, what is the procedure by which you can recover, and what is our values about that, so that there is consistency. And we're just kind of starting that discussion, but look for that sometime in the future. I just want to let you guys know it is on my radar, but I'm not sure at this point if it needs to be a policy or a building level, like procedure or policy, as opposed to a district level. And I'm not sure, but I welcome any feedback from this committee or other board members on that.
Can I say something? Well, we want consistency throughout the district. So if it's a building procedure, you got to make sure that this is, let's say, a high school procedure between the two buildings. Because if, let's say, they started at North and then they moved and they transferred to South, you want to make sure that same procedure, we're following it there.
Right.
That's exactly the conversation that Ms. Raymond and I had, and I thought it was important that we bring in Mr. Richard, Mr. Burns to have that conversation, because I think it should be at the building level, but I think that they have the most impact on that, and at least start the conversation. I think it's a good conversation to have to promote that consistency that you're talking about, but at least start with their level and get their input for what those next steps could be. Because I think we've all been in situations where, I'll pick on my own situation in college. I know if I got Professor A, I might have a bit of an easier semester as if I chose Professor B. That's out there, but I think we are trying to promote that similar experience for all of our students across both buildings.
Right, and I mean, we don't want our teachers to be automatons. Everybody has their own teaching style, but we want the parents and students to know that the expectations for our grading practices and our recovery practices are consistent. Does that? So I'm really interested to hear from Mr. Burns and Mr. Richard about that. And then that kind of led into a discussion about competency grading, because back when that was approved back in 2015, it was supposed to be reviewed after, I forget how many years, like 4 years or 5 years, we were supposed to have a presentation back to the board about, hey, how's this going? Can you tell us what's working, what's not working? Does the board need to take any further action? And so that policy is due for review. And so I've asked Mr. Posca to meet with the principals on that too, so that they can bring information to us about if we should do anything with that policy. So, go ahead.
Because that brings up a very good topic, because when I was on the board from 2000 to 2001, before I became an alderman, we implemented block scheduling, and we were supposed to go back, the board was supposed to go back and make sure that it was working properly, because one of the principals and the superintendent at that point, I had gone to Chelmsford, and Chelmsford had a really great block scheduling where they had those little skinny classes in between for the math, but they didn't want to implement that. They wanted the 90-minute classrooms. And I was on the board with, I'm sure everybody knows, Mr. Clemens and former State Rep James Clemens.
Oh, yes.
I was on the board with Mike Clemens, and he worked up at Central West, I think it is Manchester. So myself, I would talk to him and a lot of teachers at the high school to make sure that this was the right thing. Truly believe that the kids need more time, but I was never under the impression that 90 minutes was the best of times. I always felt that from what I was seeing, 60 minutes was better than 45, or even 65 to 70, probably, to give students a chance to, if they didn't understand something, to review with the teachers and all that. I think we're at the point in time that when are we going to review the block scheduling to make sure that that block and all that time that we are giving for certain classes is really right? And should we have some skinnies and speak with the teachers that are here now, and teachers that I know have been here for quite a while? I know there's certain, like special ed, might need more time, those students, but that doesn't mean all the students with all those classes might need all that 90-minute period. And could we do a better job, like I think math or some other subjects that need to be given closer than spread out maybe a year? So I know it was, as far as I know, it was never reviewed.
Yeah, I think that that's one of the things, without having a mechanism to bring it back to the attention of new boards. And with the policy committee, it's only been the last couple, I'd say 3 years, that the policy committee has really made the commitment to saying we're going to try and review all of our policies every 4 years so that this stuff comes back. Stuff gets fallen to the wayside. So I've made a note in my notebook to ask Mr. Burns and Mr. Richards about the block scheduling as well, because I know, do you know when E-Block was established? Was that 4 years ago? It was after competency grading started, but before the pandemic. And so, and I think part of it was to address what you were saying, that kids needed some flex time built in during the day as well. So I don't know that the board has gotten, we've had like a tiny update, like, where they had to change E-Block at some point, but that was a pre-pandemic as well. So just to pick the principals' brains about what's working, what's not working, do they need anything from the board? Yep. And pretty much that's kind of how I'd like to have some of these conversations with the principals too, is really go in with, do you need anything from the board? Because this committee is here to be responsive to what both the staff and the principals need, and you need from the district, and also make sure that we're representing what, the community needs are too. So So that's all I've got for tonight. And then I didn't write down the list of all of those B policies in my notebook. I have it. Oh, I did, in fact. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 B policies. For next month, we'll try and get through as many as we can, along with any other things that Mr. Posca has that the district needs us to do that can't wait. But August is a busy time for the district, so I didn't want to burden staff as they're getting ready for back to school. I know, the summer's flying. It's so rainy, that's why. All right, so would anyone like to make a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Okay.
Okay.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so we are adjourned at 7:15 PM.